In 865, the invading Great Heathen Army swept through Britain like wildfire, and after 6 years of violent struggle, the political map of Britain had been completely redrawn. The ruling dynasties in East Anglia and Northumbria had been swept away and their lands taken by the newcomers. Mercia teetered on the brink of a total collapse, its east flooded by marauding Scandinavians. Various rulers of Pictland fought on to retain their independence, and even the Welsh had their fair share to deal with. Yet one kingdom remained intact. Wessex, under their king Alfred, managed to pay a group of invading Vikings under Halfdan to leave his kingdom. Yet similar agreements were made and broken before, so Alfred knew that sooner or later the Vikings would be back. Ivar, who hadn't been present during the Wessex campaign, was busy in the north. He was joined by his ally, a Viking sea king of Dublin, Olaf the White. In 870, they attacked the capital of the Brythonic kingdom of Clut, Dumbarton Rock. They besieged it for 4 months before the defenders finally gave in, but no quarter was given. The citadel was razed, its defenders slain, and the survivors were taken to be sold at the slave markets of Dublin and York. Ivar made off with so much plunder that he possibly retired, and luckily for Wessex, he wouldn't reappear again on English shores. Despite that, Ivar and Olaf's descendants in Dublin would continue to play a huge role in Britain and Ireland for centuries to come. After his withdrawal from Essex in 871, Halfdan headed north to Northumbria with half of the Viking army, around 1,000 or so veterans who he had been fighting with since his arrival in Britain. When he arrived in the north, he began to divide the lands between his men and set about ploughing the fields. This wasn't conquest anymore, it was colonization. Meanwhile, in East Anglia, the second half of the army that had attacked Wessex was now under the command of a newcomer. Guthrum and his Great Summer Army had provided a breath of fresh air into the now exhausted veterans of the initial expedition, and now, along with Halfdan's warriors up in Northumbria, they set their eyes upon carving up the severely weakened Mercia. Alfred's brother-in-law, King Burgred of Mercia, was forced into exile in 874, and a puppet ruler, Ceolwulf, was put in his place while the Vikings divided up the land. Wessex now stood alone, the last Anglo-Saxon kingdom not to fall. In 875, the Vikings started to test the defences of Alfred's kingdom. Small fleets of 5 or 6 vessels continuously raided, showing Alfred that invasion was possible from any direction. Like all of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, Wessex had an army of levies that could be called upon in times of war. These farmers fought with what equipment and armour they owned, which usually wasn't very much. They weren't a professional standing army like the Scandinavians. After the campaign season was over, they would traditionally return back to their lands as they had done for generations. Alfred's personal retinue of professional warriors probably only consisted of a few hundred men. Guthrum, on the other hand, had many thousands of warriors, the vast majority of them hardened from a lifetime of war. They could live off the land, and as long as they could keep supply lines open with East Anglia and Mercia, they could ravage Wessex almost at will. In 876, Guthrum thundered across Wessex with a large host of mounted warriors. He defeated a small force of West Saxons led by Alfred on the south coast and seized the important regional town of Wareham. Alfred sued for peace again, and Guthrum accepted, both sides probably hoping to buy more time. The next spring, Guthrum was on the move again, and this time he headed even further to the west. His target was Exeter. Exeter provided a number of options for Guthrum should he need to retreat. Yet there was also another reason why Guthrum had chosen to take his men there. He was drawing Alfred away from a second threat. Another army, commanded by Ubba Ragnarsson, had Irish and Frisian Vikings in its ranks. It overwintered on the south coast of Wales and was now making its way down the north coast of Devon. This army of 4,000 Vikings was carried by 120 longboats. The situation looked grim for Alfred. However, in one of the most fortuitous moments of chance ever to befall England, Ubba's fleet was destroyed by a freak storm off the coast of Dorset. Leaving the survivors to limp back to their base in southern Wales. Upon hearing the news, Guthrum abandoned his plan and rode north to Gloucester in the south of Mercia. However, Alfred was still beset on all sides by armies of raiders intent on personally sacrificing him to Odin and usurping his kingdom. On the 6th of January 878, in the midst of the Christmas festival that was an important part of Anglo-Saxon culture, Guthrum threw all of his cards on the table and suddenly appeared at Alfred's royal estate at Chippenham with a mounted force of his best outriders. This surprise attack, possibly launched in conjunction with treacherous West Saxon ealdormen, very nearly ended Alfred there and then. He barely escaped with his life, with just a handful of followers, whilst Guthrum sent his warriors in swift pursuit. Alfred fled west deep into the marshlands of the Somerset Levels, at the time a vast area of undrained boggy wetlands. He knew the area well, having spent much of his youth there, while Guthrum had no such knowledge of the intricate riverways and secret paths. Alfred set up his base on the island of Athelney in order to make his final stand with just a few hundred followers. Had Alfred failed, or given up and ran like Burgred of Mercia did, England would have become Daneland. Guthrum stood on the very brink of becoming king in not just East Anglia and parts of Mercia, but Wessex too. For the next several months it was Alfred who was forced to launch raids into his own kingdom, now overrun by Guthrum's warriors. After hearing of Guthrum's success, Ubba returned to Wessex to take part in the division of the kingdom, this time with only 23 ships. He made landfall somewhere in northern Devon, near a fortress called Arxkinwit. This location was selected with intent to corner Alfred in a pincer movement after his withdrawal to the wetlands of Somerset. Rather than the easy campaign he had hoped for, however, Ubba was met there by the ealdorman of Somerset, Odda, who had levied his fyrdmen to drive out the invaders. It was there, at the Battle of Kinwit in 878, that Ubba, the last living son of Ragnar, was struck down in battle. Guthrum was left overextended by the destruction of Ubba's force at Kinwit, and this appears to have allowed Alfred and his ealdormen to break up Guthrum's exposed supply lines and lines of communication. Alfred then called as many of the fyrdmen of Somerset, Wiltshire and Hampshire as he could, the only counties left to have any semblance of West Saxon government. For 3 long days between the 4th and the 7th of May, they waited at a local rallying point, called Egbert's Stone, for their warriors to arrive from all corners of the kingdom. Finally, once a sufficient force had been raised, probably several thousand levies with only a few hundred professional household soldiers, they marched to Edington, where Alfred engaged Guthrum's warriors in one final definitive battle that would decide the fate of Wessex once and for all. A ferocious battle ensued as the two shield walls crashed against one another. All day the two sides fought, until finally the smaller Danish force broke and fell back to their fortress at Chippenham. The West Saxons had no mercy for the Danes that day. They killed everyone who didn't make it inside the fortress and besieged Guthrum for 2 weeks before he sued for peace. In addition to offering the customary hostages and promising to leave Wessex for good, the Vikings promised that Guthrum would be baptized as a Christian. Alfred was convinced that this time the Vikings would keep their word. The Danes finally pulled out of Wessex entirely, retreating back to East Anglia, where Guthrum became king. In 886, Mercia was divided between Guthrum and Alfred, with the Anglo-Saxons retaining control of the western portion of the country and the Danes settling the east. It was an extraordinary turnaround for Alfred and the West Saxons. Not only had he saved the kingdom, but now he found himself in a relatively strong position. Tensions would flare up every now and again, but by and large, Guthrum would keep the peace, giving Alfred the breathing room he needed to fortify his country against further invasions from overseas, of which there would be many more over the coming years. Thank you for watching the second documentary in our series on the Viking invasions of Britain. There are more episodes to come in this series. We would like to express our gratitude to our Patreon supporters who make the creation of our videos possible. Now you can also support us directly via YouTube by pressing the sponsorship button below the video, or you can buy our merchandise via the link in the description. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.